original Pizzagate story came from a group of Macedonian sheep farmers who hated Hillary Clinton. And so they had created the story online and convinced the world of it. And at that point, I said, I'm gonna investigate it.
Wow.
Because
And
it's
I haven't
too
heard that.
crazy. And we were reporting this on air. We were reporting this. CNN was reporting this. And I was like, this is nonsense.
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I'm honored and excited to be joined by none other than Ben Swann. Let me tell you about this incredible guy and what he's been up to. Ben's a broadcast journalist, and he has been for over 20 years. He's worked for Fox, CBS, NBC. He's won a couple of Emmy Awards and a few Edward R. Murrow Awards. And those are the awards that the Radio, Television, and Digital News Association gives as they honor outstanding achievements in electronic journalism. Ben has been absolutely dedicated to the truth and the integrity that he brings to his work, caught my attention many years ago. And to this day, second to none. He's working his butt off. And it's such an honor to have you. Thanks for being in, brother.
I appreciate it, brother. Thank you. That was a very kind intro.
Thank you.
Maybe more kind than it deserves to be, but I appreciate it.
No, man, you do great work. And in today's environment, it's no easy feat.
Yeah,
you know,
it's true.
And I know you've been through the ringer.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's great to have you, man.
Thank you.
Really. So I know that this all started for you, and it was much more of a, it was a career choice, but it was just something that you were like, yeah. But then it became something that you are a lot more passionate about, and I'm wondering if you could walk us through that. Yeah.
Yeah. So listen, when I first got into, broadcast news, I was 20 years old, right? And it really was out of necessity. I got married very young. My wife and I got married when we were 20, and then we started having kids. And I was actually going to be a minister. That's what I wanted to really do. But I had some experience in TV because I had three brothers who were also in TV doing as videographers and editors. And so after a while, I needed to make more money. I had two kids, and I was just like, had to do something else, and had moved away from my hometown, which was El Paso in Texas. And so we moved back there, and I knew some people in TV, and I got to get back into TV. And I just went back as a videographer, photographer is what they call them. And so I started out doing that, but I just couldn't make enough money. And so I went to my boss and I said, listen, I got to make more money, and I got to get on air. That's the only way I can do it. And he said, well, you can't do that. You get to just jump to on air. You need 5 years experience. And I said, here's the thing. I don't have 5 years. I can't do that. So one thing about me is what I've learned over my life, it kind of started there, but I've learned over my life is, first of all, no is not an answer, right? Somebody tells you can't, you got to find a way to do it. But it's many times many times what that will require of you is that you do more than the other people will do. Right. And so what I found throughout my career was I was always doing twice the work for half the pay. Right. Because eventually it was going to pay off, and, I'm still waiting, but eventually it'll pay off. And so what I did was I just went in and I was willing to do more than everyone else was. In my hometown, they originally said, okay, we'll give you a shot to be like a sports anchor. I never anchored sports even one time. Right, but we're going to give you this shot. But in exchange for that, you're going to have to still be a videographer, an editor. You're going to work as an editor for everybody else and a photographer for everybody else. And then you'll do your own stuff on the side. It never happened. And so it took a lot of years. And it's a long story, but eventually got on air and then kind of went from there and built my career. And then started, I think the first time I really saw the power of what we could do in journalism was pretty early. It was around 2000. I don't want to get the dates wrong, but somewhere around 2003, there was a little girl. So I was in El Paso, right? And the El Paso market is West Texas, El Paso, and then it's also New Mexico in Las Cruces, which is like kind of the bottom corner of New Mexico. Right. The rest of the entire state of New Mexico as a TV market is one market, right? So they call it Albuquerque. It's not Albuquerque. It's the entire state. But there's this one little chunk, Las Cruces, which is only about 40 miles from El Paso, which is part of the El Paso market, which makes sense because it's not anywhere near, it's like 4 hours from Albuquerque, and it's 40 minutes from El Paso. So it's part of that market. And part of my gig in terms of like, hey, I got to be on air and do something. The first reporting job I had was they had a bureau in Las Cruces, and they said, we need someone to go do it. Nobody wanted it. Are you interested in doing it? And I said, absolutely, I'll go do it.
Yeah.
Right? So I went out there and I worked my tail off and just beat the pants off our competition out there. We were leading newscasts all the time. And while we were doing that, there were a number of stories, and I only did this job for about 18 months. But during that time, there were a bunch of stories that would happen where there would be children who would...
Hey guys, the conversation got just a little too spicy for the platform that you're watching it on. So if you will, you'll have to head over to Patreon to see the full, unedited, uncensored version. God bless. If people understood, that's a whole nother conversation.
It is.
What and who the Clintons are. Yeah.
Well, the Clintons are just a product of the machine, right?
Yeah.
They are maybe a startling example because you can look at them and see so many like very glaring examples. But the truth is, they're just a product of this much larger machine. But I want to say this in terms of you said something that triggered my mind. The opportunity to really transform things, right? And to make a difference and to bring justice. I think that's what is starting to happen. The amazing thing is, as a journalist and the guy I've worked for everybody, I've also been independent, and we're sitting in this election cycle, right? We've now come to the end of. By the way, I was right on everything I called.
Yes, you were.
Every single thing.
Yes, you were.
Right? I said he was going to win the popular vote.
Yeah.
People said I was crazy. He was going to take every single swing state. Absolutely did. There's these hilarious videos of people who are analysts, right, who are predicting it so wrong the day before. Pollsters.
Yep.
This guy they called Nostradamus, and he's sitting there covering his head and saying, I think she's going to lose. Yeah. Because you're drinking your own Kool-Aid,
Yep.
right? But I think what's so amazing about this cycle, more than anything else, is the fact that so much of the American public's view of Trump, and it's not just Trump, by the way. This is not a Trump thing. Some people will call it that. It's absolutely not. The reason Trump is president-elect today is because he wisely, and whether it's other people influencing him or it was all him, I don't know. But he wisely surrounded himself with this coalition of people. And it doesn't mean they're all good people.
No.
You know, it doesn't mean Elon Musk is this saint who's going to save the republic, or Tulsi Gabbard is, or Robert F. Kennedy Jr., right? J.D. Vance or Tucker Carlson. None of these people in and of themselves are good people enough to save anything. But they are people who are endeavoring to hold up the fabric on which the republic is built, right? And so by Trump surrounding himself with these people, he energized a base of people who had stopped voting, who weren't interested, right? And then they say, well, you know what? What if we actually can have this? But the way that we were able to reach, he was able to reach people, was through podcasts. Mm-hmm. This other medium that's been completely ignored by the CIA, and it's been completely ignored by the deep state. What they have focused on for decades was how are we going to control mainstream media, and then after 2016, the entire focus became how do we control social media.
Right.
And then there's this thing called podcasting that, don't worry about that. They're not having any influence. I guarantee you.
Yeah.
The podcast world is about to come under incredible fire. So you better hold on to your hat, buddy.
Oh, I know.
They're coming for you.
I know it. It was only a matter of time. But for the last, I would say, 8 years at least. 8 years, I think, because it took a few years to really gain momentum with Rogan leading the charge. But, you have some of the last bastion of information and truth, and even with YouTube, of course, becoming all about censorship, which the question is, was it always the Trojan horse we know it is, or because those two guys, they used to go to Burning Man and they were, everything was open sourced, and Google was very, I want to say, almost hippie-like, and everyone liked Google because of that. It was like, Google's awesome. They treat their employees great. They got meditation pods in their workplace and stuff.
Yep.
But, to use a Star Wars pop culture reference, Execute Order 66 was given, apparently, because when Trump was elected, I'm sure you heard of Zach Voorhees, the Google whistle.
Interviewed him last week, in fact.
Oh, well, there you go. Small world. He gave me all the details of what happened the day Trump was elected and the meeting that they had.
Yeah.
You know, basically telling their entire like global staff that, you know, this is a travesty. You know, this is obviously the American people can't be trusted to think for themselves. So
That's right.
it's our responsibility to help them out with that. And Zach was like, wait a minute, I thought democracy was happening. You know,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? You know,
The people spoke.
Exactly.
And they said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So I, you know, it was just flabbergasting to hear how, you know, it's the arrogance of some of these tech companies.
Well, and I think it's more than the arrogance of the tech companies. So you're alluding to this, and I think you're also right that all of the tech companies, right, whether it's Google or it's Amazon or at one time Twitter, these companies, Apple, all of them have government contracts, right? The massive government contracts. And, you know, you look at a company like AWS. AWS makes more money than Amazon does, right? But where does this money come from? It doesn't come from doing work with individual companies that want AWS is the backbone of the internet. It comes from massive Pentagon contracts and government contracts. So when you get these huge contracts from governments worth billions and billions of dollars, they also control everything that your company is going to do, because here's your choice. Your choice is either you're going to work with us or we're going to work with a competitor and we're going to pump billions of dollars into their bottom line. So there's golden handcuffs here where a lot of these tech companies know they have to play ball or they're not going to exist. They're not going to win. Why did Facebook win the war against MySpace?
Yeah.
Right? They won because Facebook received massive amounts of government dollars, and it was pumped into that company, and MySpace didn't. But if Mark Zuckerberg hadn't been willing to play that game, it would have gone someplace else.
True.
Right? This is just how it works.
It's very true. It's a great point, and that's one of the ways they get to be the titans that they become.
That's right.
Is because of the information they can provide. You know, and no perfect candidate examples: Google, Meta. You know, Facebook, Meta. But you know, I know that. You know, you were building you had a show called Reality Check. You know, and you were really growing your channel on YouTube, and then you guys started posting your segments on Facebook, and the reach that you were achieving was pretty incredible. I had Jason, you know, Jason Basler?
Yeah.
You know, he was very much taken out. I think it was it 2016 and
around that
when
time.
they had that purge, you know? And I'm wondering, is that the time that that this was going on? Like, were you part of that?
So I was actually pre-purge. I was purged before the actual purge.
Oh, wow.
So the actual purge happened around 2018. That's when they really started bumping everyone out.
Yeah.
It was a result of the 2016 election, but it happened in 2018. So I was actually purged prior to that at the beginning of 2017. And I was actually the first one, even before Alex Jones.
Damn.
Yes, I preceded
You
Alex
have that
Jones.
honor.
Yeah, exactly. And it is an honor, right? Was kicked off. But the reason that I preceded all of them was because I wasn't kicked off by the tech companies themselves. I was kicked off by my bosses at CBS because of my reporting. So the exchange was, in order for you to keep your job, you have to remove all your social media.
Oh.
So you couldn't have social media. So a lot of people thought I was fired. I actually wasn't fired. So I worked here in Atlanta for CBS for another year, completely off anyone's online grid, but there were still billboards with my face on them around town.
Right.
And I'm still anchoring the news every single night.
Wow.
But they removed it. So to me, and that's what really when, for that year, trying to figure out what's my next move, right? What I realized was there's something really deep happening here in terms of online and social media, because why would they say it's fine if you stay on air, you just can't be online, right? And so to see that, them kind of showing their cards gave me a lot of kind of insight into what was coming. And then sure enough, in 2018 when I left, and then we started up independently again. And by that summer, here came the purge.
Right.
And that's when Alex was off, and Jason Basler and about 400 other, 800 other people purged from YouTube, purged from Facebook. And they continue to purge even now, right? There was another big round of it in 2020 during purged a lot of people. And it was more than just purging people at that point. That's when YouTube took the stance like certain subject matter is not allowed. Right. So in 2020, it was by 2021, it was you can't talk about and we're taking your channel down. And YouTube is still doing that. They're still enforcing those policies.
I know that I'm not helping my algorithmic reach, talking about and expressing my sometimes strong opinions on what's happening. I know that, but I can't shut up either way. You know, hopefully the censors shift again, like they did, you know, after 2020, 2021. But once they flag you, it's tough.
It's very tough. It's all shadow banning. And that's another thing that we don't even know about, right? We know shadow banning exists. We don't know how it works. We don't know the level to which it impacts you. That's the whole point of it, right? It would be easier if they would just outright ban you. But when they leave you on there where you're trying to reach people and you're like, but 90% of my people can't see anything I'm putting up, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I know. I remember posting and Adriana would be like, I'm like, did you see the pictures? She's like, no. I was like, oh, yeah.
Of course you didn't.
Not even showing my wife, you know.
Yeah.
Amazing. The Facebook but, you know, I've heard you talk about this and we're, you know, yes, I think it's obviously more prevalent now in the mindset of society regarding what has happened to the media and how it went from like, well, as a journalist, you're not supposed to have and share your feelings or your opinion. I mean, obviously, when you're speaking words about something that's happened, the feelings just tend to come out. That's how we humans operate. But, you know, I think it was like, I don't know, it was 2016 when one of the big legacy media companies was like, well, screw it. We're just going to tell you, we're for this candidate. And I was like, well, wait, what? You know, there goes journalism essentially. But, you know, you've talked about how there's a lie that's, you know, being kind of forced and it's forcing us into and we see it now, the right wing versus left wing, you know, it feels like it's been in a crescendo, but I know that your understanding and what you feel is happening has evolved as you have. And, I'm wondering if you would share it.
Sure. Well, I think it has evolved. And so I think my view of it has only changed because I'm watching what is changing, right? So in 2012, 2013, 2014, around that time, you know, I was very much convinced that this left-right paradigm was fake, right? This is not a real paradigm. It's the left wing and the right wing at the top are the same uniparty, right? And, you know, it's crazy to talk about this stuff because a lot of the people right now who have become not just famous, but very powerful in the last couple of days, people like Tulsi Gabbard, right? I'm talking about this stuff long before anyone even knows Tulsi Gabbard's name. Bobby Kennedy, you know, talking about before he was talking about free speech long before Elon
That's how you
Musk,
got in so much
right?
trouble. That's one of the many ways.
That's right. You know when they say the first bird out of the bush is the one that gets shot?
Yeah.
That's what happens. And so it is, even though I'm probably younger than most of those people are, except for maybe Tulsi. I look at them and I think it's almost like watching your kids, right? Stuff that you've been raising the flag on for a decade, 15 years, trying to wake people up and say, this is what's happening. And all of a sudden, people who are now saying stuff you've been saying for years actually have the power.
Right.
It feels amazing. Like it's such a great thing. However, on the point of what's happened, so you had this left-right paradigm that was very, very fake. And then what's happened is over the last few years, because Trump is the one who really changed it, right? What Trump did was he came in under the right, but he's not a guy from the right, right? And the first time around, he came in as a guy from the right, surrounded himself with neocons who were the same thing as neoliberals. The only problem was in 2016, no one knew what a neoliberal was. We only knew what neocons were because of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney.
That's right.
Right. So he surrounded himself with those people. But when he went out and Biden comes in, and the same people who have been with Obama, because the Obama people were the same as the Bush people, because it's all the uniparty, you had this disruption that happened, right? If you go from Bush to Obama, and then had it been Clinton, it's all the exact same thing. Right? It's like permanent rule.
It's a legacy. Yeah.
And you pop in this guy who does something different, sees it different, and they hate him so much, everything becomes about destroying him. So the truth is Trump never really got a chance to govern, right, in those 4 years. But what he did do is he kind of awakened a segment of the population, not the whole thing, but a segment of it. Then you have Biden who comes in, and we go right back to where we were. And now people felt it. You know, it's so interesting. If Trump had won in 2020, he would have been fairly ineffective.
You're right. I've never thought about it, but you're absolutely right.
This is a crazy idea that the best thing that could have happened to the country potentially is Trump losing in 2020. If he had been in 2020, his vice president would have been Mike Pence, not JD Vance.
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard would have been
no Bobby Kennedy.
Nobody. No Bobby Kennedy. Right? No Elon Musk.
No Elon.
None of these people are associated with Trump or the Republican Party. But because of this swing of the pendulum, and it really was the deep state and bureaucratic state grabbing control again, installing a guy who was just completely, deranged, out of his mind. He can't, and it's a sad thing, but
it is.
That's what he is, right? They put this puppet in there. It was so clearly a puppet. Then when you get to this election cycle and they remove him unceremoniously, and then they install an even bigger puppet, right? This cackling, marionette doll, and they put her in there. And now people are finally like, wait a minute, that's shocking. And then you look over here at Trump and you say, well, do we want Trump again? And maybe he becomes more interesting because they keep trying to him and throw him in prison. So he's doing something that's making these people mad.
Yes.
And then he surrounds himself. And the funny thing is, none of these people are Republicans.
No.
Right? They're all former Democrats or what I would call classical liberals. Right? Who have moved into this space. And so now you have this incredible realignment happening. And one of the best things for a guy like me to watch what's happening is now you finally see, it finally happened, the stuff I was saying 10, 12 years ago of the neocons and neoliberals finally formed a single party, the Democratic Party. That's where they all win. When you get Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, and they were begging George W. Bush to come out the last weeks before the election, like it would have helped. It wouldn't have helped at all.
No.
But it would have been wonderful to see. It would have been. He was smart to stay out of it.
Yeah.
But it would have been great to see, like, put them all in the same
Might as
room
well.
so we can see you guys finally for what you really are.
They probably had a big debate over whether that would help or hurt, and they decided Cheney's okay because the daughter's still in. But
my understanding is they begged him, and that he said no.
Wow.
He said, "I'm not."
What did they imagine his endorsement would have done at this point, with knowing what we know? It's probably better. I mean, it worked out great either way, but there was no endorsement they were going to get from W or any other Bush that wasn't going to move any needle. But the left hated Bush.
They called him a war criminal. He is,
and he is. You know what I mean?
And Dick Cheney is too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but they're an entire party of war criminals. Yeah. Barack Obama's a war criminal.
Absolutely.
Right. And what again? This is where to me it got so interesting. Now Bush was smart enough to say, I'm not falling for this, right? Because he could see that ship was sinking.
Yeah,
I'm not jumping on that thing. But again, what's amazing is when you have the Bushes and the Obamas and the Cheneys and the Clintons all on one side, it's like, this is what we've been telling you.
Right.
They were always on the same side.
Yep.
And they finally coming together to wave the flag and say, if you want to align with us, what they thought was going to happen is you get these moderate Republicans who are going to come out and vote. Right. They weren't going to come vote because George W. Bush said vote for her, right? They just weren't going to do it. And what everyone missed, there's this hilarious TikTok. I don't know if you've seen this or not. This lady who's like, by the way, I'm thinking about doing my very first reaction video. I'm going to do it to this video.
Nice.
It's incredible. This lady who's like, it's the day of the election, and she's cackling and laughing and talking about how she went to a convenience store and bought a bottle of champagne to toast Madam President tonight. And the guy behind the counter was asking her, who did you vote for? And she's telling him, that she's voted. And insisting, she says, she's going to win because the women of America are standing up and this is going to happen. And at the end of this, she's like laughing that he says to her, well, we'll see. It might be close. And she says, we won't see. It's done. And he said, how do you know? And she says, I am a political analyst.
Oh, man.
Of course you are.
Wow. I got to find that video.
It's so good.
That is hilarious.
It is so good. And she's so absolutely sure of herself. But I think the reason I think it's so funny is because it's so representative of that kind of media class, political class, who was so convinced, drinking their own Kool-Aid. And part of it's because, when people say there's this forgotten America, that no one talks to or no one talks about, they're not lying. There absolutely is. And at some point, you have to recognize that there is a forgotten America, and they turned out and voted.
Right. That's right.
Massive numbers.
They don't call it the silent majority for nothing. Massive numbers. And I feel like people innately understood that it was going to take that kind of energy and movement and turnout to make sure that this thing could not be finagled or
stolen. You can say it.
Yeah, stolen. I mean, like, and also sheds a light on 2020. Like, wait a minute. Where'd those extra 20 million votes come from? You know, I mean, like 20 million?
Where'd they go?
Where'd they go? I mean, you know, it's like flu cases in 20. They just disappeared.
Where'd they go?
All of them.
Yeah.
Like nobody's scratching their head. No, it's amazing what they get away with, you know, what because they're in charge of, you know, policing themselves. So we're kind of screwed. But I see a lot of hope with, and I feel like things are shifting now. I hope that they can remain, you know, that they keep him safe, that they can begin to implement these changes, you know,
fast.
Yeah, and that they do it in a way that's smart, that knows that they're going to come under fire, you know, hopefully not literally, but you know, they're going to do what they can to white knuckle the power.
Oh, absolutely.
But I tell people all the time, you know, I'm like, listen, you got to understand that Clinton, you know, George Herbert Walker Bush was very happy to give Clinton the White House. Clinton was in his pocket. You know, those guys were in business together for over a decade.
That's right.
You know, hundreds of millions of dollars of every kind of, you know, was being brought in. And I was like, so it's not that Herbert was president basically when Reagan was in, you know, he was more than happy to punch out, and, you know, he knew he could make the bigger decisions from wherever he was going to retire to anyway, because Clinton, he had so much dirt on Clinton. I mean, Clinton had dirt on him too, of course, but, you know, I said the baton of corruption was passed, you know, whereas once it had become very obvious to most people that the Republican Party is where it lived. The deep state isn't stupid. They understood that, you know, and they had people working on it. And so they quietly passed the baton, and that's how Clinton took office and made all these wonderful changes to some of the structure of things and allowed even more corruption, you know.
That's right.
And then people don't realize that Barack Obama is actually related to the Bushes.
That's right.
You know, Uncle Herbie. And just, you know, how he is simply just another legacy politician who was really put there to do the bidding of the deep state. And he did a great job, you know.
Oh, he absolutely did. I mean, you have to remember that under Barack Obama, every single thing that the left claimed made George W. Bush either a war criminal, or made him kind of an enemy from within in terms of his Patriot Act and everything against the American people. Every single bit of it was expanded under Obama. That's
right.
Right? He did not shrink any of it. The fascinating part is he ran as a candidate to do exactly that. He was going to get rid of these things, and instead he expanded all of them. And it was actually done with a certain amount of brilliance. You have to give credit, right, where it's due. There is a certain amount of brilliance where you can look the American people in the eye and tell them, I'm going to end the war in Iraq, end the war in Afghanistan, I'm going to close Gitmo, I'm going to get rid of the Patriot Act. You say all this stuff, you don't do any of it. You actually expand it all, and by the time you're done, no one's even asking for it to happen anymore. When Clinton's running, who on the left is even talking to him? Nobody. Then you get Trump again in 2016. Some of the things he did that were so unusual was he did things like criticize the Iraq War. Yeah, you know, I remember when he was running in the primary against 15 other Republicans, only single guy on the stage who will criticize the Iraq War. Right. Well, wait a minute. There's 15 opponents. There's you. There's 16. There's 16 people running for president of the United States, and only one of them thinks that this war that had been dragging on at the time for almost 20 years was
trillions of dollars.
Trillions of dollars, a million Iraqis, a country that was completely
one of the oldest civilizations, completely up in, and still in a state of chaos and upheaval. You know, our the democratic fingerprints are just atrocious. The way we've spread democracy.
Yeah.
Such a dirty
But go
word.
back for a second to something you said earlier. Because I don't know with your audience how aware they are of this, but you have to think about going all the way back to 1980, right? You mentioned Reagan, and you said Bush was really the one running it, right? The truth is that, and a lot of people don't realize this in terms of the history of it, that George H.W. Bush was supposed to be the Republican nominee for president. And when Reagan ran, I believe he ran for the first time in 76 and did not get it, the nomination.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And they tried to pull something at the convention where he was going to take all the delegates, and it was a whole messy thing. When he ran in 80, he had a lot more support, right? So typically that's the way it works. You run the first time, people know who you are, and then you go again. But it was supposed to be George H.W. Bush. And so when it looked like Reagan was going to take the whole thing, George H.W. Bush becomes the compromise to say, well, he'll be your vice president.
That's right.
Well, who was he before that? He was running the CIA before that, right? And then you look at every major scandal in Reagan's administration. Iran-Contra, that wasn't Reagan. Reagan wasn't running weapons. That was all Bush. That was all the CIA.
That's right.
All of the drug stuff we were talking about being flooded into California and being flown in by the narcos and coming in through Arkansas and coming in through Miami. All of that stuff that happened, it was all coming through the CIA, right? Well, the guy who ran the CIA is now the vice president of the United States. And if you take the 8 years of Reagan and his 4 years, you have 12 consecutive years of him being able to institute these policies, which ultimately kind of crescendoed for him with the first Gulf War.
Right.
Right. We hadn't been at war anywhere since Vietnam, and now all of a sudden we're back in war. And since that time, then under Clinton, we had all these military engagements in places like Kosovo. And then, of course, we get to his son, and then it's perpetual war.
Right.
And you can, if you step back with a 40,000-foot view, you can really see it. You can see what they had created, and you got to give credit. If your goal was to say, we need more war, we need to upend countries around the world, we need to destabilize this country. If you look at what they were doing, it's actually an incredible map, historical map of what happened, which is why, again, the moment we're sitting in, there's so much hope for it, not because these people are saviors, but because you finally were able to bring people in who are awake enough to recognize what was happening. Now, the big question will be, do those people slither back into the administration or not, or can they keep them at bay?
How much can they keep them at bay? Who the sleeper cells are going to send in, the Trojan horses. And we're going to find out just how powerful, this position of president truly is.
Yes.
Because that has not been tested since John F. Kennedy, truly,
That's right.
in a way that really would have made systemic changes for the American people and the world, and going back to a time when it was peace that we saw.
That's right.
I loved John F. Kennedy he just broke the mold in every way. I mean, he had to do and deal a lot of dirty things to get in there, but he did them like Bruce Wayne style. He was trying to, his end game was to help people. And he was trying to do that in like this den of vipers. And I love when Bobby would talk about, my father and my uncle, they wanted us to be the example of peace, not military might, not expansionism and imperialism, but to lead the way through. We have this incredible economy, this incredible country, and we could be leading the way in so many awesome things. And what are we concerned about? It's just so twisted. And then you start to learn about some of the background of some of these people and what they're taught, and it starts to make sense. But it's hard for everyday people to really grasp the level of betrayal that has gone on, in the American government. Even to its people, specifically to its people, let alone the world. And guys, I think people are naturally good-natured. It's hard for them to imagine someone could be so psychotic. Such a dehumanization of everyone else. But how else do you do what you do if that's not the way you've been indoctrinated?
But doesn't it then suddenly require so much more of you if you accept that as well?
Yeah.
If you say, oh, wait a minute. So these forces, these powers, these entities are not benevolent. They're not on my side. They're actually working against my interests. That requires something of you. So it's easier just to say, no, that's not happening.
Oh yeah, it's much more comfortable.
Yeah.
No, that's for sure. And that's another big thing. You're shaking the foundation of people's entire understanding of reality.
Yeah.
And it's that, unless you're shaking a very specific kind of person,
Yeah.
it's not going to go over so well.
But something has happened because, again, when you look at Trump's first term, and then you see this. Listen, God bless Joe Biden. Really, seriously, what Joe Biden was able to do by being, again, completely
Vapid.
incoherent, not knowing what's going
yeah.
on, is that you're talking about that shake effect. This is what it had. Such a radical set of policies, such a rapid dissension in terms of what happened with our economy, to watch the border completely overrun, 20 million people here, 300,000 children lost somewhere in the country and no one knows where they are.
Nobody has tabs on them.
Completely insane. And then around the world, we're on the verge of a third world war. And these people are driving us towards all
in 3.5 years.
3.5 years. So that's why I'm saying it has to happen that way. The slow creep of it happening over 40 years or 50 years, and this is just life. This is just what the world is. But if it happened, if you broke away from it for just 4 years with Trump, and now all of a sudden you're jarred back into it with and let's also be fair. You also had for a year.
Yeah.
And for a year introduced this, Orwellian, like we were talking about before we started recording, where you can't. Yeah.
2020.
Yeah.
What a scam. What a money making the testing alone.
Unbelievable.
I mean, let alone the loans, the debt, and the amount of money consolidation, but the testing,
yes,
the worldwide testing alone, and having it be bottlenecked through one, or two patents.
Yeah.
Fucking brilliant.
It is.
It is diabolically brilliant.
But when it happens that way, it's diabolically brilliant in terms of the money-making scheme. The mistake is it's a short-sighted goal. Again, if you stretch this out over a long period of time because you're boiling the frog by turning up the heat, makes sense.
Yeah.
But they took the frog and they threw it into the boiling water, and there were so many people who reacted so viscerally to that. The problem was Trump goes out because the magic 20 million votes show up. And then all of a sudden, which again, I think actually turns out to be a better thing in terms of history. But now you have this now jarring effect of, well, you just went through that batshit crazy nonsense. So now we're going to move over here. And what are we going to do now? Hey, let's bring all these people in and let's destroy the economy and let's make everything about transgender rights. And everything becomes so nuts that people look at it and say, okay, it is happening.
Right.
It is. All this crazy stuff. The Joe Rogans of the world aren't the crazy guy on the internet talking about aliens. Those guys are actually saying something real, right? And then you also have the issue of you still have the mainstream corporate media looking you in your face and telling you everything's fine.
Everything's. I mean, I don't know how anyone watches it anymore, and people are talking about this election cycle should be the death throes of it. We'll see. There's always going to be that generation, as long as they're around. My parents' generation.
Yeah.
And even my mom and dad stopped watching the news. I was like, why wouldn't you watch? It's like pollution for your brain.
Yeah.
And none of it's true anyway.
None of it's true.
And like when the whole thing went down with the plan and people believed. People believed when they said that this was the way. This was the only way.
Yep.
The reason why you're seeing the health crisis in America is there's a lot of reasons, but I think that's a strong one. Mm-hmm. And then of course there's the food and the chemicals, and then there's the air. They're coming at us every which way. Which I look at how our population has kind of been kept. Other countries have like 1 billion people, and like what they reproduce faster than we do. I mean, we have more economy than both those countries. We have technically more stability to be having more kids, but it's one psyop after the next as far as like, well, if you have kids, shame on you because of change, and they get to people, and I'm like, doing a number on everyone. And then there's the fertility. that is we're seeing this, and no one's talking about it.
Nope. No.
And we're getting a good idea of where it's coming from. We're narrowing it down, but of course, who's going to stop these companies from producing the amount of plastic that they produce?
Right.
It's a subsidiary of the oil companies.
Yeah.
And we know who's in bed with them. Dick Cheney and the Bushes and the rest of those oligarchs. But what was the first thing that you got? I mean, so when I heard about you, they were coming after you for Pizzagate.
Yeah.
And, I was talking to my team and I was like, we're just launching a Patreon page. And so I'm like, I'm going to talk to Ben and let the conversation free flow. I was like, whatever we don't want to put on the YouTube edit, we'll just cut it out. But I'm gonna ask him about it, because one of the ways you came into my attention was when they were coming after you about Pizzagate.
Yeah.
And again, Pizzagate, sorry to interrupt, guys. The conversation gets just a bit too sensitive, shall we say, spicy, for this platform. So we are encouraging everyone to head over to our new Patreon page for an opportunity to view the uncensored full-length podcast with the one and only Ben Swann, and check out all our tiers. God bless.
There is very real disinformation out there, and it's not what they tell you. The funny thing is, everything that you're accused of is what they're actually doing.
Almost always, yeah.
Yeah. Disinformation is a very real thing. And what happens is, when a real story breaks, there are people within our government, right, who work in places like the Pentagon, and they work in Arlington, and their job is to create craziness and to tweet it out and to send it out all over the internet. And you create such a storm of insanity,
right,
that nobody can even tell what's true and not true, right? And you're like, I'll give you an example that people would be more recently familiar with. So you have like the Epstein list, right?
Yeah.
And remember that right before Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, there was a whole thing about how the Epstein list was coming out, right?
Yeah.
And there were names on it. And then all of a sudden, if you started looking online, there were so many lists coming out, and it had everyone on the list.
Yeah.
The Matthew Perry from Friends
everyone who's
was
ever
on the list.
Been near the man.
Not just near the man. Like anyone who was famous,
right,
was suddenly on the list. Singers and actors, and it was just like, the lists were incredibly long. And I remember my daughter came to me one day and she said, "Did you know Matthew Perry was on Epstein's list?" And I said, because she's a big fan of Friends. And I said, "No, I wasn't."
No.
And she says, yeah, I saw this list that was published. And I said, "Show me the list." So she said, "And where did it come from?" "Well, I was just online." Right. It's just online. Right.
Yeah.
And so I believe the reason that happens is because if everyone is on Epstein's list, no one's on Epstein's list.
That's
right. It's a very kind of simplistic, overly simplistic tactic that's used. If suddenly there's this scandal that breaks, and you hear that Hillary Clinton likes the abuse of people in those circles is not uncommon.
No.
And one thing we also point out is that this is a bigger thing than a John Podesta, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. That was the low-hanging fruit. But the reality is, you look at people like Dennis Hastert, which we mentioned in the piece, right, who was the Speaker of the House, right, third most powerful person in the country at one point, was finally sentenced for having raped and molested wrestlers when he was a wrestling coach.
Yep.
And the judge in that sentencing said he was the most violent, prolific offender he had ever sentenced.
Wow.
Right? And this man was the Speaker of the House. It doesn't get talked about. And there is, without question, one of the things that our media is so guilty of is allowing, public life and that level of public service attracts sociopaths.
Yeah.
It does. Terrible people rise to those positions. Yep. It gives them the power, the opportunity, and the access to abuse people. And so I think for the average person, what we have a hard time understanding is, why would someone in that position also be a sociopath?
Yeah.
Why? Why would they be so cruel and so violent and so horrible? Well, because you're drawing those people into those places. And that's why all of a sudden you say, well, it can't be everybody in Washington who's like this. Well, it's not everybody. No. But there is I think in terms of the general population, there is an outweighed or outsized sample of very cruel and abusive people who get into those positions.
And it's been like that for a while. And, sadly, there's a lot of insiders and whistleblowers who have come forward and said, look, no, the truth is they get put into that position because of their penchant for sociopathy, for to be ruthless and cold and completely detached and do what needs to be done when they're told. And that's the scariest thing of all, is like the fact that many of them are promoted for that reason, and it's been going on since, I'm reading a book right now called Chaos, about Candace Owens was just talking about it. And some of my followers were like, oh, you got to read it. You got to read it, Faust. I'm like, okay. And it's just all about this, what the CIA was doing with in and around Charles Manson. Charles Manson, and I'm going to do a special on this eventually, was a false flag. I mean, he was one of the most kind of unsung, I think, possibly ever. But that's what he was used for. He was completely MK Ultra'd, and I'm putting together a piece about it. But people don't realize that, again, could have easily been stopped, and they didn't want to stop it. And where else have we seen that? We see that with some of the shootings that have gone on. Yep. Literally, mothers going around, and I'm just like, is anyone watching and listening to what they're saying? I mean, like that story broke about Uvalde, and it made no sense from the jump, none whatsoever.
Right.
And it was just one, kind of obvious, what seemed to me like a belligerent, orgy of evidence, so to speak. Like they were like, well, first he posted, a guy who never posts,
right.
I'm going to my grandmother, and then on Facebook, his lone post, and then he was like, I just my grandmother, now I'm going to go to the school, and I'm like, who's in charge of these agents who are doing this, and who told them this would be like a believable
scenario? Yeah.
I'm like, if I'm reading this screenplay, it's a red light. It's back to the drawing board. You ain't getting a dime from me. This is terrible writing,
Yeah.
Then they said that what happened was the grandmother called the police, and they had that phone call on record. And then she said, he stole my car. So now you have, threats and a stolen car, and when the police give chase, and apparently they run this kid off the road, right into a school, and I'm like, when's the last time that you saw a police chase end, like a real police chase, more than one car, end in an accident where the guy gets away?
Right.
Not only does he get away, but he apparently runs into the school that he happened to crash next to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this makes no sense if you think about it. None of it makes any sense. And then you find out the kid, the word on federal catalog and worked at like Wendy's or something like that. And I'm just like, you guys got to understand, what COINTELPRO and what they've been doing. They've been doing this for so long. They have murdered Americans in cold blood.
Yep.
And pretended and made the world think it was someone else, some other faction. And if they're capable of that, what aren't they capable of? And that's what people don't understand, the history. Because if they did, then this wouldn't be a surprise. But I'm always talking about it. History, real history.
Yeah.
And then what we're taught in schools.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference. You gotta seek it out though. And I tell my kids, I'm like, what are you learning about? World War I?
Right.
Come home and I'll tell you what really
exactly.
happened. All right.
There you go.
Because they're not going to tell you the truth. They're going to tell you what they want you to believe. But and then we get into like Alex Jones and Sandy Hook, and him being held responsible. Meanwhile, the media can lie all day,
Right.
and people can die because of their lies.
Correct.
And they're not being shut down and sued for $1 billion. And all Alex did was make a mistake. And I get people who are like, well, he was making money off that mistake. And I was like, even if he was, making money, even if he deliberately knew and was using this, how much money did he make? Did he make $1 billion?
Right. No.
Did anyone get hurt?
Right.
Were
Right.
They, you know?
Well, what they say is they were hurt emotionally. You made me sad,
Yeah.
or you hurt my feelings because you were talking about my kid. Listen, one thing that Alex really messed up there, and the reason he messed up, I remember at that time there was a big push. And this is another disinformation thing that was happening. There was a huge push online claiming, what's it called, crisis actors.
Yeah,
remember that? And the crisis actor thing's kind of gone away, but it was really, really big at that time. There was this big push about crisis actors. And it was like, no, all these different things that are happening, they're not really happening. They're all actors. And they would show you like pictures of different people and there are all these different things. I feel like he kind of fell into that a little bit. And listen, that can happen sometimes. There are times when your audience pushes you and pushes you and pushes you, and they convince you to say something you shouldn't say. I feel like that's what happened with Alex there. But I think the thing about Alex Jones is if you look at his overall record, he's got a pretty good record. Yeah. Right? I mean, this is a guy who called the Iraq War before it happened, called 9/11 before it happened. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And he messed up on that one. However, to your point, $1 billion? First of all, the idea that you should be sued for anything, if that's the case, why is CNN not sued for telling people to take all these shots that didn't help them, telling them that the Wuhan virus started in a wet market.
The Russian collusion hoax for
absolutely.
You know, have they gone on record and correct and set the record straight?
Right.
Will they ever? No, of course not.
And so you all those entities are supposed to be now liable for billions of dollars for everything they get wrong. And so but the Alex Jones thing is actually very, very important. And there needs to be something done about it. I don't know within this administration what they can do, but something needs to be done. And the reason it does is because Alex Jones is in a lot of ways, multiple times since this happened, he's a test case.
Yeah.
They test something with him. They float it to see, will this work? And in this case, because it seems to be working, right, it's like, well, we're going to bankrupt him and this is how we're going to get rid of him. If that standard is allowed to apply to him, you would have to apply it to everyone.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's the way you kill it. Maybe the way you kill it is you go back and you say, okay, if this is the standard, we're going to hit everybody with this. All of a sudden, all these lawyers from CNN and NBC and ABC are going to come out and say, nope.
Right.
They'd be on Alex Jones' side if they knew that was the case. So there has to be a way to kind of rein it back, and I hope they do, because it is a test case. They're testing.
Oh, totally. And it's a shame. You know, I wonder how much of it was methodically done to bring him down. You know, because they played the long game, and shit. As soon as Alex snuck into Bohemian Grove, he was marked. He had it coming.
Yeah, yep.
You know, you knew they were going to come after him. But how do you bring him down? You know, and they found a way. You know, they found a way to. They haven't been able to silence him, but they've been able to discredit him successfully. You know, people think that people who don't know just think that he's a raving. You know, and he plays the part well too. He does get very excited.
He does. Fluoride in the water.
Yeah, he's destroyed his voice.
The funny thing is, the guy who used to fluoride in the water is now going to get the fluoride out of the water.
Right, exactly.
So, and talk about playing the long game. Alex is going to win in the end because, you know.
Amazing.
He's got a guy like Bobby Kennedy saying we're taking the fluoride out of the water.
I hope that he's redeemed. I hope that they find a way to let him, you know. Like I saw one video, they were taking his cat because he had a high, you know, and he was obviously emotionally distraught about it.
Yeah.
But that's so fucked up.
There's talk now of they're pushing for Alex Jones to be the press secretary.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be awesome? That would be great.
Incredible.
Just to watch the press briefings, to watch him yell at everybody.
Yeah.
It would be outstanding.
I mean, for people who don't know Alex Jones, if you want to understand or get a little bit of a grasp of just how much knowledge is in that man's head, watch his first marathon episode with, I think, Joe Rogan. Watch both of them, but you know, everything he says, Jamie is forced to go check out and is like, oh, actually that's true.
Yes.
And Rogan's like, get the fuck out of here. That's true. You know? And one after another, he says the craziest shit. Well, actually the Chinese are, they're cloning half human, half tiger right now. And Joe's like, shut the fuck up. And Jamie's like, no, they are. I just found the article. and you know, for people who are like, yeah, he's a lunatic.
He'll say they're turning the frogs gay. And then you look it up and you're like, oh shit, they're turning the frogs gay. Are you kidding?
You know, say what you want about him, but there's a lot going on, a lot of information.
He's a brilliant person.
Yeah.
And listen, if the standard is you can never be wrong,
Yeah.
nobody wins with that standard,
No.
right? But I will say that I think his association with Rogan, his association with Dana White now, his association with Trump,
Yes.
like he even with Tucker Carlson, Tucker's helped to kind of lift his image some. I feel like he's in a better place in terms of reputation.
Oh, yeah.
Than he has been. But yeah, let's get him into the administration.
He's
Let's
got
put him
a
in charge of
chance,
something.
I think. And I, even though he's never been politically oriented, he's been on the left. You know, he was outspoken against George Bush, and that's when the left was like, Alex Jones is great. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
You know, he was their hero for a few years there.
Yep.
But he's never been politically oriented. But, you know, and the moment he got on Trump's side, you know, you had people saying he's done. You know, he's done. You can't commit to one side because both sides are corrupt. And while that may be true, I don't know what choice Alex had.
I think you can't commit to a party.
Right.
But what he's having to commit to, well, first of all, you have to, this is where a lot of people have been criticizing me in the last couple of months. They're like, you finally picked a side. And I'm like, yeah, but the side isn't a political side. The side is, I've been trying to tell you about all these corrupt, terrible organizations and bureaucrats and corporations and everybody who's robbed you of your freedom. And there's finally a group of people who are saying, we all agree that that's been happening. We're going to change it. What am I going to turn around and be like, you bastards?
Yeah.
And like, no, I mean, this is what you've been begging for. Now, what I will do as a journalist is I'll hold them accountable to what they said they were going to do. If you go out there and you bring in Mike Pompeo to be your Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense, you're done.
No.
Right? We'll come after you. But
I can't believe that's even being
floated.
I mean, what?
I don't think so here's what I believe. Okay. I think what's happening in the last 48 hours is that since nobody, I think, in Washington thought he was going to win.
Right.
I think they all drank their own Kool-Aid. Yeah, they all drank their own Kool-Aid. They believed something otherwise. They also believe that you know, they can influence the population and they have this ability. When Trump won, they immediately started scrambling and saying, okay, how are we going to fix this? So I'll give you an example. So we actually did a report on this yesterday. So within 24 hours of Trump being elected, there was a Wall Street Journal article that comes out saying the Trump team has a plan for how to deal with Ukraine. Did you see this?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I started to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the plan was basically 3 bullet points. It was create a kind of a demarcation zone that would have no U.S. troops in it. Right.
Right.
There would be a 20-year pause on Ukraine joining NATO.
Yeah.
And the U.S. would continue to supply arms to Ukraine. And it's like, this story's fake.
Yeah. Belligerently.
And as usual, as per usual, they don't name a single source because it's all unnamed sources that are close to Trump's inner circle who are saying this bullshit. None of this is real.
Right.
But what they're doing is they're throwing it out there because they're trying to start shaping and control.
Right.
I suspect the way it works is like this. Whether it be a lobbying group, it be corporate interests, or it be the kind of deep state interests. They have their people in the media. They feed them a story. They get them to write the story. Then they turn around and they get Washington politicians to read the story and then react to the story thinking like it's almost like it's like mind control, right? They're telling you this is the right way to do it and see how the feedback is from the public, and people like this idea and they're kind of cornering you. Got to kind of do it. This is what they're doing. And I think with Mike Pompeo, it's the same thing. They're floating him out there like, well, Mike Pompeo, he might be the guy. And the good thing is, because they are so not used to a public that is awake and informed, the people around Trump being awake and informed, that there was immediate backlash. So people who are within the campaign, I made some calls yesterday and just said, please tell me this is not a real thing. And they're like, there is such backlash to this. I don't think there's any way it's going to happen.
I'm sure. And like you said, there are people whose job is solely that, you know, and
what they do.
The public needs to understand that a lot of it is literally chaos and confusion, you know, and keeping people, like keeping the TDS, which is just shockingly effective, you know, how successful that psyop was, and still going for many people to this day. They have no idea why they hate the man, but they hate him with a passion. They hate everything about him. They're willing to vote for, this puppet administration with a history of genocide, complete lawlessness, and incredible debt, and inflation, and everything else that actually affects their quality of life.
Right.
Whether they want to admit it or not.
Yeah.
But and that's how powerful these psyops are. But they'll vote against Trump just because they hate him.
Well, and they'll vote against their own self-interest.
Yep.
Because they're convinced they hate him.
Yep.
And they're so convinced that if you don't vote for him, what's so crazy to me is you have literally millions of women who have been convinced that this entire election was about abortion.
Yep.
Because if you let Trump become president, he's going to end abortion. First of all,
it's so ignorant. It's insane, and like the level of fear they generate among women about reproductive rights is just off the and of course women get passionate about them. And on one hand,
sure,
if it is their body, I don't blame them for if the situation was reversed. Let's be real, abortion would be legal and available probably at every 7-Eleven. If it was men who were in charge and wanted the choice, there wouldn't be a fight about it, But that's neither here nor there.
Possibly, but yeah, possibly. But here's the thing: women have been convinced that he's going to do something that he didn't do the first time,
right?
And says, "I'm not going to do this time." He's actually pro-choice. He says now he's pro-life, but he's actually pro-choice. Melania comes out and says that she's like rabidly pro-choice, right? And again, the what's already happened with Roe v. Wade was the correct thing to do.
Right.
You send it to the states because that's constitutionally the way it should be, anyways. And on top of all of that, the one question Anderson Cooper actually had the balls to ask Kamala Harris was, "There's no way you can do this."
Right.
So what's your plan? Because if you get elected, you will not have the ability in the Senate to get a national abortion law that guarantees abortion. There's no way it happens.
No.
So what you've convinced these women of is not only will he do something he's not going to do, but she will do the thing she's not going to do,
and that she has no capacity to do.
And the day after the election, they're sitting on Instagram and TikTok, bawling their eyes out and crying and thinking that
I don't want to be
it's now the Handmaid's Tale. But it's effective. You have to give credit to the fact that you've created a system that is so effective. And again, it is this format, it's this medium, this podcast medium that broke through a lot of that.
Yeah.
Because they had convinced so many people. It was that and the ability to get men to get up and to go vote and to re-engage them. And that's not to say it was, the media wants to also make it was a man versus women. Trump carried a lot of women.
He did. A lot more than anyone probably thinks.
That's right. And you know what those women were concerned about? They were concerned about things like their children's health and quality of food, and they were concerned about the economy, and they were concerned about not being able to own a home, and they were concerned about many, many things. One thing the media does constantly is they boil people down to the lowest common denominator, and it's usually something where they pretend there's some monolithic group that only cares about one thing, right? And they do that with Black Americans. They do it with Latino Americans. And the funniest one are the Latinos. Right? I grew up in El Paso. My wife's Puerto Rican and Hispanic. Our kids are mixed. And I will tell you, and I live in Miami half the time. And what I will tell you is that Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Ecuadorians and Venezuelans and Argentinians have nothing in common. Right?
No.
They kind of share a common language. Right. But it's not that common. Because you watch a Puerto Rican talk to a Mexican, they can't tell what they're saying. I understand more of what the Puerto Rican's saying and the Mexicans saying than they understand of each other. Because the language is so different.
It's so true.
But when you treat people like they're some monolithic group that only thinks one way, well, sure, it makes it easy to get ratings because that's how you're programming, but it's not humans. And I think that we've broken through a lot of that. Thank God.
Yes, I think we are, and we're continuing to. Barack Obama chided the African American community. Yep. I mean, he literally talked down. I mean, he scolded them essentially, and he pulled out all the stops. I mean, the lingo, and I saw this 2-minute clip of he was an actor, a Black actor, and he was like, if you don't like what I'm doing, talk to me about why. Don't yell at me and tell me I'm stupid, you know, and he was like, that's just not like, what do you think people are going to hear that and be like, he's right. We should vote for this woman of color, you know? And I'm like, they were desperate, you know?
Yeah.
They sent him in. He's got to do what he's told anyway.
Exactly. And again, what other strategy can you use?
No.
You have to play on you must hate women.
Right.
You must hate yourself as a black man if you won't vote for this black woman. And it's like, no, I actually love myself, and that's why I'm not voting for her. Because I actually think, so that's the other thing that's been, a friend here in Atlanta who I've known her for a lot of years, and she and I probably politically are as far apart as you can be, but still mutual respect. And she was talking to me about it beforehand, and I told her when to vote.
Yeah.
Did you vote? Yeah. And I said, where did you vote? Midtown. And I was like, oh yeah, how were the lines? She's like, it was so easy, it was so fast. I was in and out.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's good. She said, what about you? Did you vote? And I said, yep, early voting. And she said, how was it? I said, 2 hours.
Wow.
And she was like, what? And I said, it's probably a good sign for me and not for you.
Yeah.
If you know the breakdown of Atlanta, right? Center of Atlanta, Fulton County, it's where she's voting. I'm voting up in Cobb, and it's the demographics are different. And it was funny because she was sitting there, and it took her a second, and then she audibly gasped, right? And I said to her, listen, in the end, whatever happens, it's gonna be okay. I don't know. She's like, there are bigger things at play here. Things at play. I'm like, I totally agree. We just disagree on what the bigger thing
exactly.
is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they do convince people that like there's a greater good here. And so what is it that the World Economic Forum says, right? You're going to own nothing
and be happy.
And you're going to be happy.
Yeah.
But why would I do that? Because there's a greater good.
Right.
Of course, it's never the people at the top who are paying the price of that greater
Right.
good. They're the ones who all profit from it. But they want you to believe that this is your lot in life. Is like, it's okay if you are poor. It's okay if you all drive electric vehicles that don't charge and we can turn them on and off at will. It's okay if the world exists. I was talking to another young lady that works for me. We were talking about gas vehicles. She hates oil companies and hates gasoline, right? And I said, well, there's plenty of legitimate criticism, but let's be honest. Poverty in the world does not exist in most places because of fossil fuels. Right. Does that mean they're great for the environment? No. But I tell you what else is not great for the environment: lithium batteries.
That's for sure.
And not only are they, I said, there's a big difference between the green movement and the environmental movement.
Yes.
So which one are you? And she's like, what do you mean? That's the same. It's not the same thing. You care about the environment. Do you care about the way they destroy land, digging up this lithium? And do you care about the fact that it's mined by slaves?
Right. Literally.
And she's like,
children and slaves.
Yeah. What do you mean mined by slaves? And we started talking about it. And like, she literally had to walk away from the conversation. She said, I can't do this anymore.
Wow.
Because it was so like, it was blowing her mind. And I said, listen, do some research on it, learn about it. Right. But the idea that, hey, there's this new way and it's good for everyone. It's not good for everyone.
No.
Right.
It's not good for the planet either. I think it's actually more damaging than the fossil fuel.
I agree.
And all that, it's all antiquated. It's all, all that technology is like, it's 100 years outdated, and they've been sitting on what they don't want to come out because that's their monopoly.
That's right.
That's how they control everything.
That's right.
But, I've been talking about this since I discovered it, it's like when you know what they're sitting on, and how they could change the world overnight. There wouldn't be wars over energy and resources because we would be able to do just about anything we wanted to in a very, very short amount of time with the technology we have. Mm-hmm. But they have that technology very much under wraps.
That's right.
And it's gonna take a lot of prying and change for it to come out because that's the control mechanism. That and the financial system, of course.
That's right.
But when I tell my kids, maybe that my teenager thinks I'm a little crazy sometimes, but he listens with interest. Mm-hmm. We were watching a space launch, and I was like, "Now watch this technology. This like 100 years old. You're like watching an old steam engine here." I was like, "That's how old this technology is." I was like, "Elon may have made it look new and made it do fancy things, but it's the same technology for the last 100 years."
Yeah.
I was like, and it's a joke. It's a dog and pony show. Yeah. And Elon has to know that. I mean, he's not,
of course.
he's like, I don't know. I've seen no evidence of extraterrestrials. I'm like, but you want to go to Mars and you haven't thought about or looked into the decades long UFO cover up in the United States? You know, it's a real thing. You know,
Absolutely.
and it's enormously substantial as far as evidence goes. And what we've been doing underground is a whole nother podcast, but you know, it's as deep and dark as you can imagine and more, you know. But I hope that also, I think it's a very good thing that Trump was elected. You know, I think we've got a chance to start to undo and turn things around, you know, and save this dream of this country, because it's a wonderful dream, you know, and our Constitution it's hanging on by a thread, but it's intact. So we have that going for us. There's a lot of things shifting, I think, you know, literally, physically, and also in the ether, so to speak. So I think it's good news. Yeah. And I know you're excited about it too, and I share that excitement. You've been spot on, man, with your report. I mean, with oh man, like I love seeing you compile the strongest sourced points, you know, and you're like, look, and you still deliver it with, you know, a wonderful. I'm not saying it's this, but this is what has been reported. This is what we know now, you know.
Right.
And so few people are willing to do that, because sometimes the truth is ugly. You know, it's not what we
most of the time.
Yeah. But this has been awesome, man. I'm so happy that you came down, and we were trying to coordinate this interview we had some crazy things pop up, and you know, Ben's very busy. If you follow him, you know that. So I'm just honored and excited to have had you in, bro. It's been awesome.
I loved it. It was great. Congratulations
on
all this. It's fantastic.
You too, man. And I really think, you know, especially now with this kind of shift, you know, I think you're going to continue to grow and get back to, you know, where you were and more. Yeah. At least I think so. I believe so. I hope so.
Well, you know, I was telling, we can close on this, but I was telling someone the other day, they said, what do you think? Like all the stuff that you've talked about all these years kind of culminated. Do you kind of wish you were a part of it? I said, no. Like, I feel like I can actually leave this part and do something now new, right? What's the next thing? What are the next issues that need to be covered in the stories that are not being told? And like, to me, that's kind of where the future goes. And we can stop talking about, it'd be great if we could stop talking about war and military industrial complex, and we could move away from some of those issues.
It'd be amazing.
And start focusing on, like you're alluding to, much bigger things, hopeful things, not just everything to criticize the mess that's being made.
There's lots of news there. You know, this world is very much addicted, and the power structure thinks that if we don't have these, you know, if we can't make their pulse race and put them in a state of survival, why would they listen to what we say? Right. You know, and that's very much. But the truth is, the opposite can be true as well. Absolutely. You know, if we give them security, if we help people live a happy life, they're going to listen to us. We will listen, and we'll even allow them to stay, you know, in their positions, but not like this. You know, this is just, it's out of control. But
for sure, it was great.
Thank you, everyone who has stuck with us. And if you are not a subscriber, which I know that probably 75% of you are not, and you enjoy this podcast, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to us on iTunes, you know, drop us a review and a couple stars, if you will. I want to thank Ben Swann again. Ben, my man.
Thanks, brother.
Appreciate you, bro. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.